Tonight we slip into the smoky, brass-scented air of an 18th-century clockmaker's workshop. The streets outside are slick with evening drizzle, horses clattering away, and the last of the daylight snuffed behind chimney stacks. Inside, it's just you, a single candle guttering on your bench, and the 1,000 tiny heartbeats of unfinished clocks staring back. Each one ticks unevenly, a metallic choir missing its conductor. You probably won't survive this century's soot, lead dust, and mercury fumes. But for now, your lungs are still functional, and your hands still steady enough to shape time itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the hush of your little shop, a low ceiling of oak beams pressing close, the smell of oil and brass thicker than the air outside. The floorboards creak underfoot as you move past shelves stacked with gears like gleaming coins. It's nearly 8 o'clock, the hour when respectable folk wind down and craftsmen like you finally exhale. The forge embers still glow, but the rhythmic ting-ting-ting of your hammer has stopped. The last wheel tooth is filed, the last mainspring coiled and tested. You lean back, wiping your brow with a rag that's long since surrendered its clean days. The candle sputters and flares, throwing restless shadows across the bench where the skeleton of a long case clock looms, its polished face catching firelight like a mask. You've been at it since dawn, shaping minutes for men who'll never understand the effort packed inside a single tick. One misplaced tooth, one grain of grit in the lubricant, and a week's labor groans to a halt. Somewhere in town, church bells toll the hour, a chorus of distant, uneven timing. You smile a little, you can tell which tower hasn't been serviced in months. That's a clockmaker's ear, the gift and the curse. You hear everything that's off by half a beat, whether it's a clock or a conversation. Your apron is stiff with filings. You lift your goggles. Yes, you use goggles, though they're really just round glass set in brass rings. The lenses distort the world into tiny, perfect circles, like staring through a spyglass at another reality. When you remove them, everything feels too wide, too raw. The contrast between close detail and the large, messy world always makes you a little dizzy. Beside the bench sits the day's oddest repair, a gentleman's pocket watch with a painted dial of cherubs. The owner swore it ran faster whenever his wife scolded him, an amusing superstition you don't entirely dismiss. After all, emotion seems to bend time even without gears involved. Historians still argue whether most 18th-century clockmakers were artisans or engineers, whether you were more magician than mechanic. But tonight, in this cramped shop, you're both. You handle components smaller than a child's fingernail, each one etched and balanced like a prayer. The oil you use smells faintly of whale and lavender, a strange perfume that clings to your sleeves. A cat, every workshop has one, slips between your boots, tail high, purring as if it too keeps time. You feed it a crumb of yesterday's bread, and it vanishes under the lathe. The air trembles faintly with the residue of vibration. You rest your palms on the bench, feeling the faint ticking inside the wood, like the heartbeat of the building itself. In the corner, a tall regulator clock keeps the truest time in the district. You glance up, always checking, always counting. The pendulum swings, a slow golden blade slicing seconds. You've named it Her Majesty, because it keeps order when you cannot. Each swing measures your life in tiny, precise condemnations, one for each breath, one for each idea you didn't have time to finish. Through the window, gaslight halos the wet cobblestones. A passerby stops, peers in, then moves on. They see your bent shadow and think, lonely craftsman, probably muttering to his tools. They wouldn't be wrong. You do talk to your tools, everyone in your trade does. They each have a temper. The burnisher demands patience. The files crave speed. The screw plate sulks if it isn't oiled exactly right. There's a strange peace in these hours, though. The town is alive but distant, muffled behind stone and fog. You can hear it if you pause. The hum of taverns, a dog barking near the docks, the faint grind of a carriage wheel turning toward home. Life ticks on, just like your clocks. You adjust a gear, testing its mesh. Perfect. You know this because you feel it more than see it. The smooth glide, no hitch, no scrape. That's what years at the bench teach you, how to hear metal breathe. The fire hisses as another drop of condensation falls from the flue into the embers. You stretch, vertebrae popping like small locks opening. The candle flame trembles again, revealing soot marks across the plaster wall, maps of every winter you've worked here. You catch your reflection in a brass casing, tired eyes, streak of soot across your cheek, the faint ghost of a grin. You look older than your years, but that's the price of intimacy with time. There's a rumor among craftsmen that some clocks develop personalities. A guildman once swore his workshop clock grew sulky after he sold its twin. Another claimed he woke at midnight to find every pendulum in his shop swinging in perfect unison, as if conspiring. You smile at the thought, half believing it. After all, you've caught Her Majesty gaining a minute whenever you're away too long. You tidy the bench. Files in their grooves, hammers back on the rack, the fine brushes cleaned. The day's metal shavings glint like scattered stars. You sweep them into a tin for recycling, nothing wasted, not even glittering dust. Somewhere out there, a future clock will tick with atoms that once lived here. That's a comfort, in a strange, slow way. Another candle stub goes out, leaving only one. Its glow pulls you toward the door leading into the back room where warmth and rest wait. But you linger a little longer, letting your eyes wander over the workshop one more time. Every corner hums with memory. The worn stool by the lathe where you nearly lost a finger that one winter. The drawer where your first apprentice hid biscuits. The ceiling beam carved with initials from the night you swore you'd quit and never did. You breathe in oil, wood, smoke, brass. The scent of a life spent chasing precision. There's comfort here, but also a haunting truth. You can mend clocks, but not hours. The candle gutters once more. You pick it up, shielding the flame with your palm. Shadows leap, gears glint, and the shop sighs as if it knows it will sleep until morning. You step toward the small hearth to bank the fire, careful not to trip on the cat's tail. Outside, the rain slackens. Tomorrow will bring more orders, more ticking, more patience. But for tonight, you let the silence hold you. The clocks keep breathing, the city keeps time by your invisible hand. You blow out the candle. The world goes dark, except for the soft afterimage of sparks behind your eyelids, tiny suns collapsing into sleep. The last of the shop's warmth clings to your sleeves as you ease open the narrow back door. The street has gone quiet, only the rhythmic drip of rain from the eaves punctuating the air. A thin veil of fog swirls past, the kind that muffles footsteps and exaggerates every glow of light. You shut the door behind you, and just like that, you're no longer a craftsman surrounded by brass and ticking hearts. You're simply a tired human chasing warmth, tea, and perhaps a crumb of peace before sleep. Inside, the little side room feels more forgiving. The forge's heat lingers in the bricks, and on a small table, a kettle murmurs to itself over dying coals. It's an old pewter thing, dented and scorched in places, but faithful as sunrise. You pour water into a clay pot already holding a pinch of dried leaves. The scent rises, smoky, earthy, faintly citrus. Tea is your evening sermon, your sacrament to sanity. You cradle the cup, inhaling steam that smells faintly of hay and comfort. The cup warms your fingers where the day's calluses don't reach. A sip burns your tongue, but pleasantly, pain is proof that you're still awake. You sink onto a stool, back pressed to the cool wall, and listen to the muffled ticking that seeps through from the workshop, like dozens of tiny hearts refusing to let the world sleep before they do. A soft knock at the front door startles you. Probably old Mr. Wren, the cooper next door, checking if you've finished the repair on his pocket watch. He's famous for impatience, claims he can feel time stutter when he's without it. You ignore the knock for a moment, savoring another mouthful of tea, pretending the world can wait. But it never really does it? You set the cup aside and shuffle back through the dim light. When you open the door, it's not Wren but young Lydia, the baker's daughter. She's clutching a bundle wrapped in cloth, face flushed from the chill. "Pa says your clock's chiming off again," she says, trying to sound stern but grinning despite herself. You chuckle. "Tell your pa the clock's right. It's the bread that's slow." She giggles, leaves the bundle, a loaf of rye and 2 hand pies, and vanishes into fog before you can thank her. You set the bundle on the counter, shaking your head. The town runs on little trades like that. Bread for time. Time for bread. Historians still argue whether tea or ale dominated an artisan's evenings in your century. Truth is, both did, depending on what kind of day you'd had. Tonight, you choose the gentler route. You light another candle, pour yourself a second cup, and settle by the hearth. As you sit, the room begins its nightly transformation. The fire's glow deepens, shadows stretch across the walls, and the clutter, ledgers, tins of screws, a basket of rags, seems to blur into a cozy haze. You can almost forget the endless precision of your trade. There's an odd comfort in the randomness of the fire, so unlike your clocks. Sparks leap without pattern, wood crackles at will, and you find yourself entranced by the freedom of it. For once, something in your world doesn't need measuring. A stray thought intrudes. You still haven't cleaned the lathe from this afternoon. A true craftsman never leaves his tools dirty overnight. But then you sip your tea again and decide, just this once, to be human instead of perfect. The lathe can wait. Somewhere above, in the rented room you call home, the floor creaks. That'll be your apprentice, probably pacing before bed. A nervous lad of 16, all elbows and enthusiasm. Earlier today he asked if clocks could ever think for themselves. You laughed, but only because you didn't want to answer honestly. You've wondered the same thing. A clockmaker in Bath trained a magpie to drop pebbles into his pendulum case whenever it slowed. Automatic maintenance, he called it. The bird outlived him and kept doing it for years, long after the mechanism rusted solid. You can't decide if that story comforts or unsettles you. The rain eases. You open the window slightly to let the mist in. It carries the scent of wet stone, horse sweat, and distant yeast from the baker's ovens. Life has texture here, gritty, fragrant, and unapologetically alive. You breathe it in until your lungs ache sweetly. Your tea's gone cold. You reheat it by holding the cup near the coals, the metal rim warming just enough to burn your fingertips when you get careless. You chuckle softly. There's your third burn this week. At least this one's not from molten brass. Through the crack of the window, faint voices drift from the street. Laughter, a lute strumming from the tavern on the corner. You imagine the scene, men hunched over mugs, women teasing them about their crooked wigs, dice clattering across tables. You could join them. Many craftsmen do, ending their evenings drunk enough to forget the tick of guilt waiting at home. But you've never been one for losing track of time. It feels too much like betrayal. You glance toward the mantel where your own pocket watch rests. The engraving on its case, Tempus Vigilat, time keeps watch, gleams faintly in the firelight. A client once asked why you didn't own a newer model with jewels in the bearings. You told him you prefer the older ones. They complain less. Your apprentice creaks down the stairs, barefoot, hair wild as hay. Forgot to wind the regulator, he he mumbles, rubbing his eyes. Go on, then, you tell him gently. Can't have time stalling on our watch. He smiles sleepily and vanishes into the shop. You listen for the faint click of the key turning, the even swing that follows. That sound, so steady, so precise, could lull a saint to sleep. You pour the last of the tea into his cup and leave it by the stair. Tomorrow, you'll scold him for nearly forgetting the regulator, but for now, you let kindness win. The night's too soft for sternness. In moments like this, the boundary between work and rest blurs. The workshop is never truly asleep, it's just dreaming with its eyes open. You feel it even here, beyond the doorway, the slow rhythm of pendulums echoing like a heartbeat shared between man and machine. You wonder briefly what the future might think of all this. Would people still sit by a fire to sip tea and listen to time? Or would someone one day trap time inside a tiny device that never needs winding, never sleeps, never errs? Historians of tomorrow will still argue about that, too. The kettle rattles softly, reminding you that even metal objects protest neglect. You pour the dregs into the ashes and lean back, eyes closing for just a breath. The warmth behind your eyelids feels like liquid brass. You drift there, half in memory, half in the present, until a gust of wind through the chimney whistles like the faintest chime. You smile. The night itself seems to keep time with you. The clocks tick, the rain breathes, the tea cools, and you, clockmaker of countless evenings, sit quietly in the space between seconds, where life hides its gentlest gears. The fog has thinned, and with it comes the hum of evening life. You pull on your cloak and step outside, the familiar squeak of your shop door replaced by the soft roll of mist. It's not yet late, perhaps 9, perhaps later, but the street feels changed, alive with warmth that daylight never grants. The tavern bells ring from down the lane, that raspy brass tone promising laughter, ale, and temporary oblivion. You lock the door behind you, pocketing the key with the satisfaction of a day survived. Your boots tap against the cobblestones, echoing between the crooked buildings. The smell of damp wool and roasting meat curls through the air. A lamplighter passes, pole over shoulder, his steps measured like the slowest clock in Christendom. He nods. You nod. You both serve the same master, after all, time, that moody overseer. You pass the apothecary, shutters half drawn, light still glowing behind wavy glass. Inside, old Mrs. Clegg grinds something that smells suspiciously of nettles and whiskey. You offer a polite evening, madam, but she doesn't hear, her mortar's rhythm is relentless. Somewhere inside that pulse, you recognize a kinship. Every trade has its ticking. Historians still argue whether London, or towns like yours, ever truly slept in the 18th century. Some claim curfew bells silenced most streets by 10. Others insist that workers, sailors, and restless apprentices kept the taverns alive till dawn. You know the truth lies somewhere between. Cities sleep with one eye open. The tavern at the corner, the sign of the bell and wheel, hums with sound. The door bursts open as two apprentices stumble out, laughter spilling into the street. You recognize one, Ned from Mr. Holt's workshop. His hair's full of filings, his shirt too fine for his purse. Evening, Master Clock, he calls, slurring slightly. Your gear's still turning. Barely, you reply. Yours seem well oiled. He laughs at that, clapping his friend on the back. The other lad, younger, grins and adds, careful, or he'll start charging you by the second. You roll your eyes. That joke's been old since before pendulums were fashionable. You enter the tavern, ducking beneath a beam scrawled with initials. The air greets you like an embrace, warm, smoky, thick with yeast and stories. Lanterns swing lazily from hooks, painting everything in amber haze. A fiddler saws away at a tune that's more enthusiasm than melody, and somewhere near the back, dice clatter and arguments bloom like weeds. You take a corner seat, half-shadowed but close enough to hear the pulse of laughter. The tavern's clock, a sorry wooden thing with a face faded by years of ale steam, ticks about 20 seconds slow. You know this instantly, of course, and the knowledge gnaws at you like a bow in a gear. You're tempted to correct it but resist. Not every imperfection demands salvation. A serving girl sets down a mug before you. "On Mr. Wren's tab," she says with a grin. "He said you'd earned it," fixing his time. You thank her and take a cautious sip. The ale's bitter, earthy, and warm enough to blur edges. At a nearby table, two merchants argue about tariffs, imports from France, the price of brass, the rumor that Swiss clockworks are about to flood the market. You pretend not to listen, though your ears can't help tuning in. If the Swiss manage to mass-produce escapements, men like you will need to work twice as hard for half the pay. Still, gossip moves faster than fact. There's always talk of machines stealing craft, of new inventions replacing skill. You've heard of a man in Vienna who built a self-playing organ. They say it can perform for hours without human touch. Historians still argue whether such devices mark progress or the beginning of laziness. You sip again, deciding that as long as no machine can taste ale, you're safe for now. Across the room, Ned lifts his mug in a mock toast. "To the masters of time," he shouts, earning a cheer from a few scattered drinkers. Someone shouts back, "And to the fools who tried to measure it." Laughter ripples, warm and harmless. You raise your mug, half in irony, half in camaraderie. A fiddler changes tune. The melody softens, turns melancholy. Conversation dips just enough for the creak of chairs and the hiss of spilled ale to fill the air. You lean back, letting the rhythm of the tavern swallow you whole. There's something liberating about surrendering to a place that doesn't care about precision. Every noise overlaps, every laugh arrives late. Chaos, but the kind you can breathe in. Then, a voice near the hearth catches your attention. An old sailor, skin like oiled leather, is spinning a story. You catch fragments: clock that ran backward, sea voyage, chaos. His audience gasps at all the right moments. You smile. Sailors always tell tales that tick between truth and fantasy. You edge closer, curiosity pricked. The sailor glances up, eyes twinkling. "You there," he rasps. "You fix time, don't you?" You nod warily. "Then maybe you can tell me why my ship's chronometer gained 10 minutes every dawn at sea." You consider. "Salt air corrodes brass," you offer. "Or maybe the ship leaned east with the tide." He shakes his head. "No. It only gained when we sailed toward home." The crowd chuckles uneasily. You grin. Perhaps time's just eager to get there. It earns a laugh, the kind that boasts tension. The sailor grins back. "Then I'll keep her eager," he says, raising his mug. The exchange earns you a nod of approval from the barkeep. You settle back in your chair. The warmth from the hearth creeps into your boots, and for a brief, luxurious moment, you imagine what it might be like to stop building clocks altogether, to live by sound and instinct instead of gears and measures. But then the tavern clock strikes the quarter hour, incorrectly, of course, and the fantasy evaporates. You finish your drink, place a coin on the table, and pull your cloak tighter. Outside, the night has ripened, fog thick again, the streets glistening with the sheen of late hours. As you step out, the door creaks behind you and the sound of laughter fades, replaced by the steady rhythm of your boots once more. The lamplighter's gone now, his route complete, and the lamps burn low and steady. You walk slowly, savoring the way each light halo flickers against the mist. The town feels like it's breathing, a slow inhale between hours. From an upper window, someone's clock chimes faintly, muffled through wooden rain. You count automatically. 9, 10, 11. You smile when the chime falters on 12, a bell too tired to finish its duty. Even time gets sleepy. As you near your workshop again, you pause to look down the street. The tavern still glows at the corner, but beyond it, the darkness is deep and quiet. The town's pulse slows. Tomorrow, it will start again, same noise, same faces, same ticking. But tonight, for these few remaining hours, you get to walk through time's quieter corridors. You take one last breath of cool night air and turn the key in your door. Inside, the clocks welcome you with their chorus, a dozen voices in harmony, patient and loyal. You set your mug on the bench, light a single candle, and listen as the world winds down. The candle's flicker softens the workshop's edges as you pull the ledger from its shelf. The spine creaks, a tired sound, much like your own bones after a day bent over gears. You set it on the bench, open to the day's page, and the scent of ink and tallow drifts up. Numbers march down the paper in neat columns, each stroke a quiet confession. Hours worked, brass consumed, oil spent, payments promised. The ledger is your other clock, one that measures your survival instead of time. You dip your quill into the ink pot. The nib scratches lightly as you record. Mr. Wren, 1 pocket watch repair, 2 hours. Repaired verge. Adjusted balance. The ink pools, then dries to a faint sheen. You pause to flex your fingers. Your knuckles ache, the price of precision. From the adjoining room, the faint creak of the apprentice's cot tells you he's still awake. Probably reading by stolen candlelight again. You consider calling out, then let it pass. Let the boy's curiosity run. The craft demands sleepless minds. You glance up at the small wall clock above your bench. 11:22. You're late logging today's accounts, but that's nothing new. Time bends around you, not the other way. You note your final commission of the week, Lord Reading's long case clock, the one that allegedly predicts the weather. You still chuckle thinking of his solemn face as he explained that its pendulum stiffens before a storm. Nonsense, you'd said politely, though secretly intrigued. The old aristocrat wasn't the only one who swore by mechanical omens. Some clockmakers deliberately left one wheel unfinished until evening prayers, believing that finishing a clock in silence brought misfortune. You've never tested the superstition yourself, but tonight, as you hear the distant rain resume, you wonder whether half-belief might be safer than arrogance. The candle crackles, dripping wax down its side like a melting pillar of ivory. You push aside your ledger and lean on the bench, eyes half closed. Your quill hand still twitches from habit, tracing invisible gears on the tabletop. You've been doing this for so long that your muscles keep working even when you rest. Historians still argue whether the 18th century artisan class had any true leisure at all, whether evening was rest or simply the quieter half of labor. Sitting here, you decide the answer is yes and no. You rest your tools, but your mind? It keeps grinding. The craft doesn't switch off. You flip a few pages backward in your ledger. There, a note scrawled in last month's ink, apprentice bone sleeve, careless with lamp. You smile faintly, remembering the boy's panicked apology and the smell of singed wool. You'd barked at him then, but secretly you'd admired his eagerness. You'd been just as clumsy once, perhaps worse. Your thoughts drift back to your first workshop, decades ago, when you were the one sweeping floors and trimming wicks. The master then was a giant of a man named Fenwick, whose temper was shorter than a clock spring. He'd whack your knuckles for filing too slowly, then mutter blessings over the tools as though they were saints. You can still hear his voice. A clock's not made, boy, it's persuaded. You didn't understand then, but now, every stubborn mechanism proves him right. A gust of wind slaps the shutters, snapping you from memory. You rise, candle in hand, and check the latch. The night outside is black, the rain hammering harder now, blurring the world beyond the glass. You watch it bead and run down, streaking the reflection of your own face. For a moment, the candle's glow makes you look younger. Then it flickers, and the illusion fades. You return to the bench. The ledger's ink has dried, leaving faint shadows of your entries on the opposite page. You add one more note, small but meaningful: supplies low, oil, brass plate, patience. You chuckle softly at the last one. Humor is the only coin that never devalues. You pull another candle from the drawer and set it aside for tomorrow. The smell of tallow reminds you of that guild scandal years ago, when someone swapped beeswax candles for cheaper tallow during the King's Commission. The clocks reeked for months, and the guild nearly combusted in rage. You still remember Fenwick whispering, "Never let time smell cheap." Across the room, the cat yawns from its perch atop a crate of unused springs. You envy its simple rhythm: sleep, stretch, eat, repeat. If only your own gears were so forgiving. You sit again and let your mind wander. There's a kind of meditation in watching a flame and hearing your own work breathing softly around you. Each tick, each faint metallic sigh, reminds you of where your hours went. You imagine them stacked like gears, small, interlocking, irreplaceable. You reach for your personal pocket watch, winding it gently. Its click is smoother than silk. The escapement will flashes briefly in candlelight, as though winking. "Don't get smug," you murmur. "You'll stop someday too." Talking to your watch isn't madness, it's ritual. Everyone needs someone to confess to, even if it's made of brass. From the back room comes a sneeze, then a muffled curse. You suppress a laugh. The boy's probably spilled wax on his pages again. You'll have to restock candles soon. The price has gone up, thanks to some bureaucrat's new tax. Luxury item, they called it. You'd like to see them work by moonlight and call it luxury. Another entry catches your eye. Last week's commission from a merchant who swore he could hear ghosts in his watch. "Ticking when unwound," he'd said. You'd found nothing wrong, of course, though the sound did linger in your memory longer than it should have. Maybe every craftsman leaves a trace behind, a vibration that refuses to die. Historians still debate whether early clockmakers viewed their creations as art or science. Sitting here, ink-stained and sore, you think it's both, and also neither. You make things that pretend to hold time, knowing full well they can't. Maybe that's the art, the beautiful lie. The candle's stub shortens. You close the ledger carefully, binding another day into the book's spine. A small satisfaction hums through you. Order made from chaos, at least on paper. You stack your tools one last time, each finding its familiar niche. The shop exhales with you, a shed sigh of completion. The rain outside softens to drizzle again, a lullaby against the window panes. You pour a finger of ale into a tin cup, more out of ritual than thirst, and toast the empty room. To accuracy, you murmur, and to everything just shy of it. A clock on the wall answers with a polite tick. You drink, set the cup down, and sit in the hush that follows. The flame dips, guttering once, twice. You let it. The shadows close in, folding over tools, ledgers, and all the small ghosts that linger in places where time is built. Soon, you'll climb the stairs to the small room above, where sleep waits like another unfinished task. But for now, you stay where you are, suspended in the brief mercy between work and rest, the unmeasured minutes that belong only to you. The ledger rests closed now, the ink's faint scent blending with the burnt sweetness of candle smoke. You stretch your shoulders, the motion pulling a familiar ache from the base of your neck. The cat, woken by the creak of your stool, hops down and winds around your ankles before slinking toward the door. You follow its lead. The night may still have an hour of sociability left, and even a clockmaker needs company that isn't made of gears. You slip through the back passage that leads toward the kitchen, though kitchen might be too grand a word. It's really just a hearth, a table, and 2 chairs that don't quite match. The smell of stew lingers from earlier, that comforting mix of onion, mutton, and something vaguely herbal your wife insists improves digestion. You ladle the thick remains into a bowl and settle at the table, spoon clinking softly against pewter. The stew's gone lukewarm, but it tastes of honest labor. You chew slowly, letting the warmth spread. Beside you, the window is misted, the glass faintly trembling with the percussion of distant thunder. Late storm, you murmur, and the cat answers with a half-hearted MP before curling near the fire. The door to the stairway opens, and your apprentice shuffles in, hair sticking up like a startled hedgehog. Couldn't sleep, he mumbles. Clock in my room keeps ticking louder at night. You smile into your spoon. That's because you notice it more when you're trying not to. Same with guilt. He laughs nervously, unsure if that's a joke. You wave toward the stew pot. Eat something before the storm kills your appetite. He does, awkwardly, scraping his chow across the floor. You study him in the flicker of firelight, the smudge of oil still under his nails, the new bone mark on his cuff. You remember being that young, curious, terrified, convinced every mistake would collapse the world. You hope he never loses that earnestness, though you know he will. Master, he says between bites, do you think we'll ever build a clock that never stops? You shrug. Maybe. But then what excuse would we have to keep fixing them? He grins. So you'd go out of business. I'd finally sleep, you answer, though even you don't believe it. A rumble of thunder rolls overhead, deep enough to shake a teaspoon on the table. The boy glances at the window. Do you think the big tower clock's running through this storm? You nod. It's built better than most churches. It'll outlast us all. Historians still argue whether clockmakers of your century saw themselves as servants to science or to society. You've never cared much for either label. What you serve, truly, is continuity. The idea that tomorrow will come in regular intervals, that someone must promise it will. The door bangs open again, this time admitting your wife, cheeks flushed from the rain. She shakes off her shawl, sending droplets across the floor. You're both still up, she says, though her tone carries no real surprise. If the world ends tonight, you'll at least die punctual. You stand to greet her, pretending to bow. Your stew's a miracle. I was just complimenting it to the heavens. Flattery, she says, isn't as filling as bread. She sets down a half loaf from her basket, still warm from the neighbor's oven. You tow a piece, pass it to the apprentice, and all 3 of you eat in companionable quiet while the rain sharpens against the glass. There's something sacred about this moment, the hush between thunderclaps, the fire's low crackle, the shyed silence of tired people too content to fill it. You sip watered ale and watch the shadows dance across their faces. In this light, the boy looks almost like your younger self, and your wife's eyes gleam with that steady calm that no storm, literal or otherwise, can rattle. The conversation drifts back to the guild gossip from earlier in the week. Someone heard that Master Holt's new apprentice filed a tooth pattern that broke under pressure. Someone else swears the Duke's watchmaker lost a commission because he made the minute hand too ornate. You'd think after 30 years, they'd learn that more gold doesn't mean more accuracy, you say. Your wife smirks. Neither does more talking, but that never stopped you lot. The boy stifles a laugh, nearly choking on his stew. You wink at him. Careful. She's right, but don't let her enjoy it too much. There's an ease to this teasing that only comes after years of repetition. Every evening you play the same small roles: skeptic, realist, dreamer. The words change, but the rhythm stays true. Maybe that's why you've survived this long. You reach into your coat pocket and pull out a small parcel wrapped in cloth. Inside rests a fragment of brass, a newly cut escapement, gleaming even in dim firelight. "See this," you tell the apprentice. "A design I've been thinking on. Might cut friction in half." He leans forward, eyes wide. "May I?" Carefully. He turns it over in his fingers, reverent as if holding relics. "It's lighter than I expected." "That's the trick," you say. "Balance. Too heavy, time slows. Too light, time lies." Historians still argue whether English escapements truly surpass the French ones of this era, but you know the debate's half pride, half poetry. Everyone claims their time runs truer than their neighbors. The thunder moves further off. Your wife rises, smoothing her apron. "I'm off to bed before you two start dismantling the kettle in the name of science." You smile. "We only do that on Tuesdays." When she's gone, you and the boy sit for a while, staring at the fire's dying heart. "Do you ever wish you'd done something else?" he asks suddenly. You think about it. The question feels heavier than the gear in his hand. "Sometimes," you admit. "But then I remember, no one else would listen to the world so closely." He nods, understanding in the clumsy way of youth. The silence stretches, warm and complete. Outside, the rain softens into drizzle again. The air smells of wet earth and soot. You rise, set your bowl in the basin, and clap the boy on the shoulder. "Off to bed now. Tomorrow's got a whole new batch of ticks waiting." He shuffles off, stifling a yawn. You linger by the fire, watching the embers pulse like tiny, dying suns. The brass piece still lies on the table, catching stray flickers of light. You pick it up, feeling its cool weight in your palm, and slip it into your pocket. Some ideas are best kept close until they are ready to tick. You blow out the lamp. The room darkens, but the clocks beyond the wall keep whispering through the silence, steadfast, relentless, loyal. The next morning's rain has cooled into a chill mist, but by evening, the clouds scatter enough for the lamps to cast bright puddles of light across the cobbles. You're back in the workshop, sleeves rolled, repairing a fusee chain that snapped clean through like a brittle thread. The air smells of oil and fine brass dust, comforting, constant, like the perfume of purpose. But as the hour creeps toward 9 again, your apprentice, Thomas, hovers near the doorway with that familiar fidget. "Go on," you sigh, without looking up. "Out with it." He shifts his weight. "We're out of lamp oil again, sir." You groan softly, pinching the bridge of your nose. "Already? I bought 2 flasks this week." He shrugs helplessly. "One spilled when the cat." "Of course it did." You wave him toward the door. "Take the lantern. Mind your footing. And if you see that Cooper's boy, tell him he still owes me 2 screws from last month's trade." Thomas grins, relieved for an errand, and grabs his cloak. You watch him light the lantern, a practiced tilt of wrist, a brief sputter, then steady glow. The flame throws gold into his eager eyes. "Don't dawdle," you warn, though your tone softens. "And if the fog thickens, follow the bell tower's chime home." He nods solemnly and vanishes into the evening. The door closes with a hollow click. The workshop exhales into stillness. You set down your tweezers and flex your hands. There's something about sending an apprentice into the night that always stirs memory. The ghosts of your own youthful errands, running oil deliveries through streets thick with smoke and mischief. You can almost feel the wet cobblestones beneath smaller boots, the nervous thrill of carrying something that mattered. Back then, you worked under Master Fenwick, the man who could silence a room with one eyebrow. He'd send you out at ungodly hours for supplies, copper filings, sealing wax, candle wick, just to see if you'd complain. You never did. Apprenticeship wasn't about learning the trade so much as surviving it. Historians still argue whether the apprenticeship system of your century was fair training or glorified servitude. Truth is, it was both. You were taught the craft, yes, but also humility, resilience, and the art of pretending frostbite didn't exist. You smile faintly, rubbing a thumb along a groove in the workbench. There's still a scar on your palm from the night you dropped an oil flask on cobblestones slick with sleet. You can recall the panic, the way your heart hammered faster than any escapement you'd ever timed. But the lesson stuck: never run with open oil. The clocks murmur behind you, each voice distinct. Some are lazy and slow, others tick with military zeal. You've come to recognize them like family members, each with a temperament, a pulse, a will. The air hums with their conversation. You almost hear words in it if you listen long enough. You pour yourself a small cup of tea, black, strong, bitter as truth, and move toward the window. Outside, the mist shifts, veiling the lamplight. You catch a flicker of movement, maybe Thomas's lantern bobbing down the lane, or maybe a trick of reflection. Either way, it stirs something soft in your chest. There's pride there, and a hint of fear. You've seen too many apprentices lost to easier trades or cheaper temptations. A knock rattles the door. You turn, half expecting the boy already back. But when you open it, it's only Mrs. Clegg from the apothecary next door, clutching her shawl tight against the damp. "Evening to you," she says. "Your apprentice nearly scared the life out of me, darting through the fog like a ghost with a lamp." You laugh. His earning his ghosthood the proper way, errand by errand. She smiles, thinly. "Good lad, that one. Reminds me of my nephew, before he took up medicine and forgot how to smile." She glances past you at the cluttered room. "Busy night?" "Always," you reply. "Time's a jealous mistress." She chuckles, offers you a twist of dried lavender for the nerves, and disappears again. The scent lingers, cutting through the brass and oil. You tuck the sprig into a jar near the window, a small offering to serenity. You return to your workbench, adjusting a mainspring under the magnifier. Your hands move automatically, guided by years of repetition. The ticking around you steadies your thoughts. It's a chorus of small certainties. But then, faintly, you hear something else. An irregular rhythm from the regulator clock in the corner. Tick, tick, tick-tock. It skips, hesitates, then resumes. You set down your tools immediately. "Not tonight," you mutter, crossing the room. The regulator is your anchor, your most trusted keeper of truth. If it falters, the world feels slightly unstitched. You adjust the pendulum, listening. The swing steadies. "Good girl," you whisper, half to it, half to yourself. You think about Thomas again. You were about his age when you began to understand that clocks, like people, don't just run, they respond. To temperature, to touch, to mood, even. Historians still argue whether early craftsmen truly believed in the temper of metal, but you do. Brass sulks when ignored. Steel resists haste. Oil forgives most sins, but not neglect. The workshop door creaks open. Thomas reappears, breath clouding in the cool air, hair damp, lantern nearly gutted. "Got the oil, sir," he pants, holding up a flask wrapped in cloth. "And the cooper's boy says he'll bring your screws tomorrow." You take the flask, nodding approval. "Good. You didn't fall into the river, I see." "Almost," he says, eyes wide with exaggeration. "Fog's thick as pudding out there." "Then pudding it is," you answer. "Now, fetch a cloth before you drip on the floorboards." He grins and obeys, bustling about as though the errand were an adventure. Watching him, you feel a pang, something like nostalgia, something like envy. Youth's energy is a kind of timekeeping all its own. It rushes ahead, convinced it can never stop. As he refills the lamps, you listen to the faint glug of oil. The light swells, painting the brass fittings with new warmth. "There," you say softly, "now we can see what we're doing again." Thomas wipes his hands on his apron. "Do you ever get tired of fixing time, sir?" You smile. "Only when it runs too fast." He laughs, then yawns, the long day catching him at last. You wave him toward the stairs. "Bed," before you start ticking yourself. When he's gone, you linger a while longer. You check each lamp, trim each wick. Outside, the fog presses against the window pane like an uninvited thought. You imagine the boy climbing into his narrow bed upstairs, the street settling into quiet, the city's collective heartbeat slowing. You add a drop of the new oil to the regulator, breathing in its sharp, clean scent. "Good work, lad," you murmur to the empty room. The clock answers with a steady, grateful rhythm. You dim the lamps one by one until only the regulator's glow remains, a golden pendulum marking the seconds between fatigue and rest. The world narrows to that slow, hypnotic swing. You stand there long after the last flame dies, listening, just listening, until all you hear is breath, brass, and the faint echo of a boy's footsteps fading into dream. When the last lamp's glow thins into darkness, you cross through the low doorway at the back of the workshop. The air changes there, softer somehow, carrying the faint smells of hearth smoke, wool, and bread. Behind that threshold, the world of cogs and springs dissolves into domestic warmth. You pause to wipe your hands on a rag, then step inside. The family room is small but alive with its own rhythm. The scrape of a chair leg, the muffled laughter of children, the gentle percussion of rain against shutters. Your wife, Martha, sits near the hearth with her mending basket balanced on her knees. She doesn't look up when you enter. She's counting stitches, brow furrowed in concentration. "You're late again," she says, though there's a smile behind it. "Time flies when you're rebuilding it," you answer, hanging your coat on its peg. Two children play at her feet, the elder carefully stacking brass scraps into a wobbling tower while the younger knocks them down with a triumphant squeal. You can't help but chuckle. "That's the most accurate clock I've built all week," you say. The older one, William, looks up seriously. "Papa, when I'm big, can I make clocks too?" You ruffle his hair. "Only if you promise never to let them beat you." He grins, showing the missing front tooth that's been the subject of much household drama. The younger, Clara, clambers into your lap as you sit near the fire. Her hair smells faintly of soap and chimney soot, a combination you find strangely comforting. Outside, the storm that threatened earlier has given way to mist again. You can hear the occasional horse clop past, muffled by damp streets. Inside, the world feels wrapped in amber stillness. Historians still argue whether clockmakers of your era truly lived above their shops or simply near them. You don't need to argue, you're living proof of the first. The wall between your workshop and your living room is thin enough that the ticking bleeds through, constant, low, almost like a heartbeat. It's been there so long that silence feels unnatural. You stretch your legs toward the fire, watching the shadows twitch across the beams. Martha finally looks up from her sewing, sighing as she snips a thread. "The boy asleep?" "Nearly. Ran halfway to Dover tonight fetching oil." "Ah. So you've already made him part mule," she teases. "Only part," you say, smiling. "Still needs seasoning." She laughs, a soft, tired sound. You love that laugh more than any melody you've ever heard. Clara plucks at the buttons on your waistcoat, utterly fascinated by their shine. "Papa, why do your clocks tick so loud?" "So you can hear them tell you secrets," you whisper. Her eyes widen. "Secrets?" "MMHM. About when to sleep. About when to dream. She gasps theatrically. Do they tell you secrets too? Only when I ask nicely. She giggles, nestling against your chest. The heat from the fire seeps into your bones, loosening the stiffness of the day. You let your eyes wander around the room, simple, worn, but full of small treasures. The pewter candlesticks from your father, the cracked mirror you keep meaning to fix, the child's sketch of a lopsided pocket watch pinned to the mantel. There's a sense of continuity here, of days stitched together by shared routines. The clatter of supper, the quiet of mending, the chorus of clocks in the next room marking each heartbeat of your family's life. Martha speaks again, her tone softer. The guild sent word this morning. They are holding elections for new officers next month. You groan lightly. They can elect whoever they like. I'll still be the one tightening their escapements after they argue them loose. She smirks. That's exactly why they want you. Someone who doesn't faint at politics. Someone who doesn't enjoy it, you correct. There's a difference. Historians still argue whether the craft guilds of the 18th century protected artisans or stifled them. You've always thought they did both, kept the trade alive, but sometimes strangled its breath in the process. Still, you owe them much. The guild seal on your sign is what keeps your shop's door swinging. Clara's breathing slows, head heavy against your chest. You look down at her tiny hand curled over yours, delicate, sure, already smudged with a bit of grease from earlier mischief. She's always sneaking into the workshop despite your warnings. Last week she nearly glued her sleeve to a balance wheel. Martha scolded her, but you secretly admired the curiosity. You whisper now, just to her, maybe one day you'll make clocks, too. Only yours will sing. She mumbles something incoherent and slips into sleep. You carry her gently to the cot by the hearth, tucking her under the worn quilt. Martha watches, expression softening. You should rest soon too, she says. You've been at it since dawn. You nod, though you both know rest comes slowly to those who measure time for a living. Your body might tire, but your mind ticks long after candles die. She returns to her mending, humming an old tune that once filled dance halls before children and rent and ticking invaded your lives. It's off-key, but tender. You find yourself tapping your fingers to it against your knee, matching the rhythm to the regulator clock you can still hear through the wall. You remember when the two of you first moved here. Bare floors, leaky roof, nothing but ambition and a borrowed bench vice. The nights then were colder, but somehow freer. You worked by moonlight, she stitched commissions for neighbors, and between you, there was always laughter, even when bread was thin. You glance at her now, the same light in her eyes despite the years. She catches you looking. What's that face for? Just recalibrating, you say, grinning. Making sure I'm still in the right century. Barely, she teases, returning to her thread. You lean back, letting the warmth soak in. The fire pops softly, sending a brief plume of sparks up the chimney. For a moment, you think of the clocks waiting next door, unfinished, untested, but they feel less like burdens tonight and more like quiet companions. You imagine each clock in its future home, a nobleman's study, a ship's cabin, a church tower. You'll never see them again, but you'll know they're out there, marking the same seconds as you. It's a kind of immortality, really. Not grand or glorious, just persistent. The cat slips into the room, tail high, and curls near your feet. William yawns dramatically, announcing his own exhaustion. Go on, you tell him. Bedtime for timekeepers. He groans but obeys, kissing Martha's cheek on his way up the narrow stairs. Soon the house is quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire and the faint murmur of clocks through the wall. You close your eyes, listening to the duet of those sounds, the heartbeat of family and craft blending into one steady rhythm. It occurs to you that this, more than any invention or recognition, is the true prize of your trade, the privilege of living within time's melody rather than under its rule. Martha finishes her sewing, folds the garment neatly, and stands. "Don't stay up too late," she says gently. You open one eye. "You mean don't start another clock?" She smiles knowingly. "Exactly." When she's gone, you linger a little longer by the fire, your thoughts drifting like ash. Tomorrow will bring new clients, new demands, new ticks. But for now, the night is yours, warm, domestic, eternal in its simplicity. You sip the dregs of your tea, still faintly bitter, and watch the last ember flare. The ticking beyond the wall steadies you, whispering its quiet truth, that life, like time, is made not of hours, but of moments like this, small, ordinary, and utterly irreplaceable. The next evening finds you at the small table near the hearth again, but this time the stew is replaced by a stack of folded letters tied with a frayed ribbon. The wax seals have all been broken, some recently, some long ago, and the paper smells faintly of smoke and varnish. You untie the bundle carefully, like a surgeon opening an old wound, and spread them out in the weak lamplight. It's your nightly ritual, this quiet communion with ink and memory. Some letters are from clients, patrons with titles too long to remember, who demand that their clocks chime precisely at 11:30 to avoid the vulgarity of the hour. Others are from fellow craftsmen, full of complaints about import taxes and rumors that the French have perfected a self-winding pocket watch. Historians still argue whether they actually had or merely claimed to, but you suspect the latter. The French, after all, have never been modest about their mechanisms. And then there's the letter you keep near the bottom, the one you reread most nights though you'll never admit it aloud. It's signed not with a name but with a tiny sketch, a pendulum in perfect balance, drawn with such precision it could have been etched. The handwriting is elegant, genderless, measured. You trace the ink lines lightly, as though the act might summon the writer from the page. The letter itself is brief, a few compliments on your latest escapement design, a question about the tension ratios, and one phrase that lingers. Do you ever wonder whether the universe itself has a mainspring? You did wonder, of course. You still do. Whoever wrote it knew exactly how to set your mind ticking long after the candle's guttered. You fold it back into its envelope, careful to align the edges, and turn to the newer correspondence. Tonight's stack includes a commission from a merchant in Bristol who wants a clock that can endure sea travel without losing so much as a second. You shake your head. Perhaps he should ask Neptune to hold it for him. Another letter, written in florid curls, comes from Lady Havisham, one of your more eccentric patrons. She claims the clock you delivered last winter refuses to run during thunderstorms, and asks whether you can install a charm against atmospheric mischief. You can't help but laugh. Ah yes, you murmur, the notorious dampness of time itself. Still, you make a note to check the case seals. Moisture could easily stop the mechanism. Even absurd requests hide truth now and then. A third letter, from the Guild Clerk, invites you to submit a sample of your latest work for the annual exhibition. You consider it, brow furrowing. The Guild prizes are mostly politics, who knows whom, who flatters whom. But still, the recognition might help business. You sip your tea, cold by now, and glance toward the window. Fog presses against the panes again, curling like old parchment. Somewhere out there, the mail carrier trudges through the damp, his lantern bobbing through time zones of mist. The thought comforts you. No matter how much the world shifts, someone always carries the message forward. Thomas enters quietly, hands still blackened from polishing a verge escapement. More letters? He asks, wiping them on his apron. Always, you reply. The world loves to write but hates to wait. He peers at the pages, curious. Who's that one from? He asks, nodding toward the pendulum-signed letter you've unconsciously kept near your hand. An admirer of precision, you say simply. He grins. Sounds mysterious. Only to those who don't understand balance. He laughs, unsure if you're joking, and sets to stoking the fire. The warmth spreads again, pushing the damp from the corners. You lean back, watching him fuss with the poker. He's learning to move with a craftsman's patience, not rushing the process. You're proud of that, though you'd never say it out loud. Pride in your trade has to be earned in silence. On the table, another letter catches your attention. This one sealed with red wax bearing the faint imprint of a crown. You raise an eyebrow. Royal correspondence rarely comes your way. You break the seal, eyes scanning the page. It's from a steward of the Duke of Marlborough, inquiring whether you could refurbish a long-neglected turret clock at Blenheim. You whistle low. Imagine that, Thomas. The Duke's clock. He turns, eyes wide. Will you take it, sir? You hesitate, then fold the letter again. Perhaps. Though sometimes the grander the client, the slower the payment. He laughs nervously. Wouldn't it be worth it, though? To have your work in a palace? You tap the stack of bills beside the ledger. Only if the palace pays its bills. The boy nods, chastened, and returns to tending the coals. You watch him for a moment before picking up your quill and replying to the guild's invitation. You keep the tone polite but non-committal. Years of experience have taught you how to say perhaps without committing to yes. As you write, the pendulum letter seems to hum quietly from beneath the pile, as though waiting its turn to be answered. You slide it aside, out of temptation's reach, and finish your correspondence. When the ink dries, you seal each envelope carefully with the wax stamp your father left you, your initials intertwined with a small gear. The wax smells faintly of bees and smoke. Each seal, to you, feels like a promise that some part of your thought will travel farther than you ever will. Thomas, now half asleep by the fire, startles when you say, "Fetch the oilcloth. These will go out with tomorrow's post." He stifles a yawn. All of them? All of them, you confirm. Time waits for no mail coach. He chuckles softly, folding the cloth around the letters with more care than you expect. You can see he's beginning to understand the ritual, the respect given not just to mechanisms, but to words themselves. Historians still argue whether craftsmen like you were truly literate in the 18th century, or merely copied forms learned by rote. You smile at the thought. If only they could see how carefully a good clockmaker reads between the lines, of a letter, of a gear, of a silence. When Thomas finally retreats upstairs, you remain by the hearth, letters bundled again in the oilcloth. You take out one last sheet of paper, blank and inviting. The quill hovers over it. For a long while, you don't write anything. You listen to the rain start again outside, the soft percussion that has always calmed you. Then, without fully deciding to, you begin a note, not to a patron or a guild, but to the pendulum sketch admirer. Yes, you write simply, "I do wonder." Every night. And if the universe does have a mainspring, I suspect it's wound by curiosity. You stop there. Anything more would feel like confession. You sand the ink, fold the page, and slip it into an unmarked envelope. Tomorrow, perhaps, you'll post it, or perhaps you'll tuck it away, like the others, for a time when you need to feel that pulse of mystery again. The clocks tick on, indifferent and eternal. You lean back in your chair, letters safe, candle guttering low, and let the rhythm of your life settle once more into balance. The fog has burned off by the next evening, leaving the streets washed clean and silver under a pale moon. Inside your shop, the world smells of oil and polish, a mixture that, to anyone else, might seem harsh, but to you feels like home. The lamps are trimmed low, their light trembling across the workbenches. It's late, and the city outside has quieted to that peculiar hum between one day and the next. This is your favorite hour, the hour of maintenance. You move like a priest among relics, touching each clock with the reverence of ritual. The tick-tock chorus greets you the moment you step through the inner door. Quicksilver chatter from the mantelpieces, slow baritone from the long cases, and the quiet conspiratorial clicks of pocket watches sleeping in their drawers. You start with the oldest, the brass lantern clock that's been in your family since your grandfather's time. The metal has darkened to honey brown, edges rounded by generations of cleaning. You lift the bell cap gently, inspect the verge, and blow a thread of dust from the wheel teeth. Still punctual, old friend, you murmur. More than I can say for some. Historians still argue whether these nightly cleaning rituals were practical necessity or mere superstition. You know the answer lies somewhere in between. Yes, dust slows a wheel. Yes, dried oil thickens and binds. But there's something else at work here too, a superstition you'd never confess to the guild, that a well-tended clock keeps bad fortune at bay. A squeaky gear is a warning, a skipped tick an omen. So, you polish. You oil. You whisper small comforts to brass and steel. Tonight, your hands move without thought. Cloth to wheel, brush to pivot, breath to dust. The rhythm lulls you into a half-trance. You imagine time itself watching from the corners, amused by your devotion. Don't flatter yourself, you mutter to the empty air. I'm just trying to keep you in line. Somewhere in the back room, Thomas stares in his cot, mumbling through a dream. The sound draws a faint smile from you. The boy has the heart for the craft, if not yet the patience. Earlier this evening, he spilled half a bottle of whale oil across the workbench. The smell is still clinging to your sleeves, rancid and rich. An offering to Neptune, you'd called it, and he'd looked at you as though unsure whether to laugh or apologize. You move on to the long case by the window. Its pendulum sways in lazy arcs, gleaming like moonlight on water. This one was commissioned by a merchant whose ship never returned, and when the widow couldn't bear to part with it, she gifted it to you instead. You've kept it running ever since, a kind of promise to her memory. Sometimes you fancy you can hear the sea in its swing. As you polish its weights, you hum softly, a tune Martha taught you years ago, something about sailors and homecoming. The clocks seem to join in, their ticks aligning, overlapping, then scattering again like murmuring voices in a chapel. You glance toward the corner, where the small skeleton clock stands naked to the world, all brass bones and silver sinew. It's your current obsession, delicate, temperamental, but strangely alive. Its balance wheel shivers like a heartbeat. You adjust the micrometer screw by a hair's breadth, hold your breath, and watch it settle into rhythm again. The candlelight flickers. For a moment, every clock in the room seems to tick in perfect unison, a sound so exact it raises the hair on your arms. Then, as quickly as it came, the harmony dissolves back into its usual beautiful chaos. You exhale slowly. Well, that was unsettling. The cat, who has been lurking beneath the bench, chooses that moment to leap onto the table, tail swishing dangerously near an open oil pot. Not tonight, you furry saboteur, you warn, nudging her aside. She blinks, unimpressed, and curls up among a pile of gears instead. You fetch a small tin from the shelf, your special polish, a concoction of vinegar, chalk, and a whisper of lavender. Your father's recipe. He claimed it sweetened the mechanism, though you're fairly sure the lavender was just to disguise the vinegar's sting. Still, you use it every night. Some traditions aren't worth questioning. As you rub it into the brass, the air fills with that faint, herbal sharpness. You feel the tension of the day slip from your shoulders. This quiet hour, when everyone else sleeps and the world seems wound down to silence, is when your mind finds peace. You imagine the clocks as guardians, each tick a ward against whatever chaos lurks beyond the door. And maybe there's truth in that. A faint ping interrupts your thoughts. You freeze. Another sound, a gentle, metallic cough, from the regulator. You cross the room swiftly, instincts kicking in. The pendulum's motion falters, its swing narrowing. You kneel, adjust the crutch pin, and find the culprit, a stray hair of brass caught in the pivot. You pluck it free. The pendulum resumes its measured arc, proud as ever. You chuckle under your breath. You're worse than a child needing attention. Thomas's voice drifts from the doorway, groggy but amused. Talking to the clocks again, sir? Only the ones that listen, you reply, not turning around. He pads closer, rubbing his eyes. Do you do this every night? Most. Why? You straighten, wiping your hands. Because they deserve it. You feed a horse, you polish brass. Keeps them loyal. He nods sleepily, as though that logic makes perfect sense, then yawns. Historians will think you're mad someday. They already do, you say with a grin. Now back to bed, before I start timing your breathing for efficiency. He shuffles away, chuckling. When he's gone, the workshop feels even quieter. The lamplight wavers, catching the dust motes like drifting stars. You finish the last of your rounds, tightening a screw here, adjusting a balance there. Every motion feels sacred in its repetition. As you cap the final oil bottle, you pause to look around. Dozens of faces, brass, silver, enamel, stare back at you, each frozen in eternal surprise. They're your congregation, your legacy, your curse. You whisper to them, you'll outlive me, all of you. And though you know it's absurd, you swear you hear an answering chorus of gentle, obedient ticks, like a congregation murmuring amen. You douse the lamps, one by one, until only the faint glow from the regulator remains. The darkness folds around you, soft and familiar. You linger another moment, listening to that single, steady tick marking the heartbeat of your world. It's not silence that lulls you to sleep, it's that sound, constant and kind, promising that time, however fickle, will keep moving forward. The following evening, the air is warmer, almost sticky, and the shop smells faintly of resin and freshly cut wood. You trudge through the door, boots echoing on the worn planks, and immediately notice the tang of humidity curling in from the open window. Outside, children's voices drift faintly from the cobblestones, the last of the neighborhood running errands before the curfew bell. You pull your coat tighter, then shake your head at the absurdity of it. Wet clothes, wet streets, wet everything, but that's the 18th century for you. Life insists on leaking in. Thomas is already at the bench, hunched over a half-disassembled carriage clock. A fine brass gear slips from his fingers, and you catch it mid-air without thinking. One day you'll let it fall, you warn, setting it gently onto the tray. Then we'll see if you weep more than the mainspring. He laughs nervously. I'll try not to, sir. You return to your own station, eyes falling on the unfinished long case you promised Lord Reading last week. Its case stands empty, solemn and tall, pendulum swinging silently in its imagined rhythm. You dust the interior, checking for splinters and misaligned pins, imagining it telling time in its future home. Somehow, watching it, you feel the weight of your own patience, the hours poured into practice and thought. There's a mainstream fact you recall. Long case clocks, often called grandfather clocks, were symbols of social status in the 18th century. The wealthier the family, the taller the clock and the more ornate the dial. You imagine Lord Reading's face, drawn with expectation, and can't help but smirk. He probably thinks gold leaf improves accuracy. You glance across the room and see the small skeleton clock, still as temperamental as ever. Its escapement wheel wobbles slightly, a reminder that perfection is an illusion. You reach for it, adjusting the tiny screws with nimble fingers, whispering to yourself, "Balance is everything, but not everything is balanced." Some clockmakers believed that winding a clock at the stroke of midnight brought longevity to the mechanism, and to its keeper. You've never done it consistently, but tonight, with the moon spilling faint silver across the workbench, you wind the skeleton clock, allowing a private smirk at tradition. Historians still argue whether these superstitions held any weight, or if they were merely ways to impose ritual on weary minds. You think it's both. Ritual organizes thought, and superstition keeps your hands busy when the nights grow too long. You pour a small cup of watered ale, letting it warm your throat as your eyes drift toward the pile of letters from yesterday. One in particular catches your attention, a note from Lady Havisham, still insisting the storm charms you installed last winter weren't working. You smile wryly, she's certain that thunderstorms carry mischief beyond her walls. Perhaps she's right. The fire in the corner crackles, casting shadows that stretch and twist across the benches. You pick up a tiny gear, smooth and cold between your thumb and forefinger, and place it on the clock's frame. It fits with perfect obedience, rewarding patience with seamless motion. That's what keeps you coming back each evening, the instant when something so stubborn finally moves as it should. Thomas coughs behind you, a soft, hesitant sound. "Sir, do you ever get bored of all this?" You shake your head. Boredom is for people with no deadlines and no gears. If you listen carefully, even the silence is speaking. Outside, a carriage rattles over the stones. The sound reminds you of another fact. Urban traffic was a constant hazard for clock deliveries, and accidents frequently delayed commissions. You'd once chased a runaway tart down 3 blocks just to retrieve a pocket watch that nearly bounced into the river. A memory that still makes your knuckles ache. You check each clock in turn, oiling, adjusting, listening. Some tick too fast, others too slow. It's never the same. No 2 nights, no 2 mechanisms. And you're beginning to understand something subtle. Time isn't measured solely by the gears. It's measured by attention, by patience, by the mind willing to follow it. The cat jumps atop the bench again, tail flicking dangerously near a pile of tiny screws. You nudge her away gently, whispering, "One day you'll learn precision, little thief." The candle flickers, almost dying, and you trim the wick with care. Shadows settle over the workbench like a heavy curtain. You glance at Thomas, who now leans back, eyes half closed, the clock parts scattered like tiny planets around him. "Tomorrow, we finish Lord Reading's long case," you say. "And I'll show you how to coax the pendulum to sing properly." He murmurs something between awe and exhaustion. "Yes, sir." The regulator clock in the corner clicks steadily, a patient heartbeat in the dim room. You lean back in your chair, sip the last of your ale, and imagine the clocks ticking in a perfect, invisible harmony outside these walls. A city of mechanisms, all whispering the same secret. Time doesn't rush, it merely waits for hands skilled enough to honor it. You blow out the candle, letting the smoke curl like a ghost through the room. Shadows merge. Brass gleams softly in the residual glow. And for a fleeting moment, you imagine the universe itself winding slowly, deliberately, as if it too respects the craft of keeping time. The evening deepens, bringing with it the kind of quiet that feels almost conspiratorial. The streets are deserted now, slick with rain that fell earlier, reflecting the pale light of the few remaining lanterns. You trudge back to the workshop, boots clacking on the worn planks, and immediately inhale the familiar scents: oil, polished brass, faint smoke from the hearth that you left burning low earlier. It's a comfort, grounding, like a memory that doesn't fade. You glance at the clock on the wall, nearly 10. You sigh. Time waits for no one, yet here you are, deliberately bending it into shape. The long case stands solemnly against the far wall, still unfinished, its pendulum a promise rather than a rhythm. Tonight, you plan to work on it, if only to coax it closer to life. You fetch the tools, lining them up with meticulous care, tweezers, files, screwdrivers, and your father's small hammer, worn smooth by decades of use. You begin with the movement, inspecting each gear, feeling for the subtle resistance that betrays misalignment. The process is meditative, each tiny adjustment carries meaning. One slip and the pendulum could falter for days. Historians still argue whether clockmakers of the 18th century were primarily artisans or early engineers. You've always found the question amusing. You're both, or neither, depending on the hour and the mood of the brass. Tonight, you feel mostly artisan, coaxing metal to obey with a surgeon's patience. Thomas enters quietly, carrying a small lantern, illuminating the workbench with a soft golden glow. He's less fidgety tonight, having learned that haste and clockmaking rarely mix. "Need a hand, sir?" he asks, eyes wide in curiosity. "Not yet," you say. "Observe first. Tomorrow, you'll do this, but tonight you listen." You adjust the escapement, tiny teeth clicking under your fingers. The wheel shivers, then falls into harmony. You exhale slowly. There's something deeply satisfying in hearing a mechanism respond to your touch, even if the rest of the room remains still. Some clockmakers believe that talking to their clocks, coaxing them like children, improved performance. You've done it more times than you care to admit. "Good girl," you whisper to the long case movement. "Don't fail me now." Outside, a distant dog barks, and you feel the pulse of the city beyond your walls, a reminder that life continues outside this sanctuary of brass and gears. You've always liked the juxtaposition, a chaotic world beyond, yet order maintained inside. It's why you keep clocks at all. Thomas leans closer, observing the alignment of the wheels. "Do they feel alive?" he asks softly. "Sometimes," you reply, "if you're paying attention." He nods, swallowing the thrill of revelation. The boy is learning, slowly, that precision is not just in the metal, it's in the patience, the care, and yes, sometimes even in the whispering. You move on to the dial, checking the hands for balance. A slight tilt, imperceptible to most, could ruin the rhythm. You adjust it carefully, humming a low tune as your father once did. The sound is soothing, filling the silence with more than music, it's a heartbeat. Historians still debate whether apprentices were trained to value rhythm as much as accuracy, but anyone who has coaxed a pendulum into perfect swing knows the truth. Timing is everything. A candle guttering sends shadows across the room, elongating the shapes of brass and steel. You glance at the regulator clock in the corner. It keeps perfect time, steady and relentless. Its tick seems to nod approval at your work. Thomas yawns, leaning against the wall. "Will it be ready by tomorrow?" "Not entirely," you admit. "But progress is invisible to most. That's the nature of this craft." The fire snaps. Sparks rise and settle, tiny golden stars disappearing into the dark. You feel the familiar lull, that gentle fatigue that comes after hours of attentive work. For a moment, the clocks around you seem almost to sigh in relief, as though content in their tear. You set down your tools and stretch, feeling the knots of tension in your shoulders ease. The workshop smells of oil, wood, and candle, an aroma of survival, skill, and quiet devotion. Outside, the night presses against the windows, indifferent to your efforts, but inside, every gear is aligned, every pendulum in its place. You take a deep breath, listening to the room, listening to time. The long case is still incomplete, yet it promises continuity, the subtle reassurance that hours and minutes can be held in your hands, if only carefully. You smile softly. This is why you endure the long nights, the missed meals, the aching hands. To create order in a chaotic world, even if only for a few ticks. Thomas stirs, yawning again, and you dismiss him to bed. Alone, you linger a few moments, listening to the chorus of ticks. Each beat is a reminder that the night is temporary, that the day will come, and that life, like these clocks, is measured in attention, care, and the quiet persistence of hands willing to act. You blow out the last candle, leaving only the soft, steady swing of the regulator. The room darkens, but it's not empty. Every gear, every wheel, every pendulum is alive in its own way, whispering the patience you've cultivated, the devotion you've nurtured, the time you've coaxed into harmony. And for now, that is enough. By the time evening rolls around the next day, the shop carries the gentle weariness of routine. The air is cooler now, carrying hints of smoke and wet leaves that cling stubbornly to your coat as you step inside. You hear the low chorus of clocks before the lamps are even lit, their ticks and tocks blending like a mechanical lullaby, each with its distinct personality. There's a certain satisfaction in that sound, a reminder that the world keeps moving, even when you, for one night, wish it might slow. You begin with the small desk clocks, those portable treasures meant for merchants and travelers. Each one is a puzzle, tiny teeth, delicate balance wheels, and high-spring pivots no thicker than a strand of hair. You carefully lift the lid of one, inhaling the faint smell of brass warmed by friction. Your fingers, trained over decades, glide over the parts, sensing the minute irregularities that only a practiced hand can detect. Historians still argue whether such precision work in the 18th century was more art than science. You'd say it's a little of both, art in the patience, science in the measurement, and a pinch of stubbornness in the insistence that a spring must obey. Thomas hovers nearby, lantern in hand, eyes wide. "Why do we start with the little ones first?" he asks. "Because they're the easiest to kill," you answer wryly, lifting a gear and inspecting its teeth. "If you ruin one of these, it's cheap. The big ones? They'll ruin you if you make a mistake." He laughs, though uneasily. You can almost hear the cogs of comprehension turning in his head. Apprenticeship isn't just about learning a craft, it's about learning the consequences of small errors magnified by ambition and brass. Some makers believe that whispering encouragement to your smallest clocks improved their accuracy. You've done it, more than once, muttering, "Steady now, steady," under your breath. It's probably nonsense, but tonight, the gear seems to obey a little more readily, as if gratitude is mechanical. You move on to a larger bracket clock, one commissioned by a local magistrate. Its case gleams under your careful polish, wood warmed to a honeyed glow. The pendulum is fussy tonight, hesitant to swing in perfect arcs. You adjust the crutch, fine-tune the escapement, and finally it swings in obedient harmony. You lean back, satisfied. Even small victories count. Outside, rain begins again, soft and persistent. It drums against the window, a companion to the internal rhythm of your clocks. You note that some clocks perform worse in humidity, an inconvenient truth that clients rarely understand. You shake your head. The science of time is never simple, especially when weather and material conspire against you. Thomas whispers, "Do you ever think they have moods, sir?" "The clocks." You glance up, amused. "Sometimes. And like people, you treat them differently depending on how they behave." He chuckles softly, then sighs, settling in to observe. You can see the gears of his mind spinning in quiet awe, beginning to understand that each mechanism has its personality, its temper, its small eccentricities. A clock, like a person, can be coaxed, encouraged, even corrected, but never fully controlled. Historians still debate whether 18th century makers considered emotional care part of their craft, but anyone who has coaxed a stubborn pendulum into perfect rhythm knows the truth. patience is as much a tool as a file or a screwdriver. The fire crackles in the corner, sending shadows dancing across the walls, elongating the brass and wood of the clocks into strange, beautiful shapes. The cat curls near the hearth, tail flicking lazily. You glance at Thomas, then back at the long case, and realize how far he's come. Careful eyes, steady hands, a mind beginning to appreciate the subtleties that separate a good clock from a masterpiece. You sip your tea, now lukewarm, and let the quiet settle. There's a kind of satisfaction in the repetition, the evening routine, the reassurance that the world will continue, measured in swings of pendulums and clicks of escapements. By the time the lamps are trimmed and the last clock's pendulum swings smoothly, you feel a deep, gentle contentment. The city may sleep outside, the rain may persist, but here, inside these walls, time is loyal, precise, and infinitely forgiving. You finally stand, stretching your shoulders and letting the rhythm of the night sink into your bones. Thomas yawns, retreating upstairs. You blow out the lamps, leaving only the glow of the regulator. Alone, you listen to the steady swing and the chorus of the smaller clocks, and you know, in this suspended moment, that the night is perfectly ordered. Tonight, the workshop feels unusually still. The fog has returned, drifting through the streets like a low, silver tide, curling around lampposts and spilling into alleyways. You trudge through the door, boots clopping softly against worn planks, and inhale deeply. The smell of polished brass and old oil greets you like an old friend. There's a comforting rhythm in this familiarity, a reassurance that no matter how chaotic the world outside, here time bends to your will. You move to the long case clock, now almost complete, and set it carefully on the central workbench. Its case gleams warmly under the lamplight, wood-honeyed and smooth. The pendulum sways with a tentative grace, testing your patience. You lean in, adjusting the crutch and nipping the verge slightly, coaxing the wheel into obedience. Each tiny adjustment brings a faint click of satisfaction, a whisper from the mechanism that you are, indeed, its master. A mainstream historical fact floats through your mind. The long case clock, often called a grandfather clock in later centuries, became an emblem of wealth and sophistication in the 18th century. Owning one signaled not just status, but the owner's respect for punctuality and order. You imagine Lord Reading admiring this very clock someday, blissfully unaware of the hours of negotiation and careful attention poured into its creation. Thomas hovers nearby, lantern casting golden halos over scattered tools. "Sir," he whispers, "why do some clocks take longer to start than others?" You smile. They have pride, sometimes. Or stubbornness. Or maybe they just like watching you sweat a little. Some clockmakers believed that letting the pendulum settle under moonlight improved the metal's temperament. Perhaps nonsense, perhaps instinctual observation of temperature and moisture. Either way, you can't resist leaving the workshop window slightly open tonight, allowing the mist to drift in. Historians still argue whether these superstitions affected the quality of clocks, or if they were merely comforting routines. You've always suspected a bit of both. There's a rhythm in ritual, a subtle influence on patience and precision that no measurement could capture. You check the smaller bracket clocks, lined neatly on the shelves, each ticking with its own distinct voice. One has always been fussy, refusing to keep perfect time unless you tilt it slightly westward. Tonight, it swings obediently, almost smug, as though acknowledging your care. You pat the side gently. "Good girl," you whisper. Outside, the fog curls against the window pane, distorting the lantern light into long, quivering shapes. A distant carriage clatters over wet stones, but the sound is softened, distant, like a heartbeat you can't quite reach. Inside, the air is warm and thick with the scent of oil and polished wood, and the quiet hum of mechanisms becomes a meditation, each tick a syllable of an invisible prayer. Thomas finally drifts back toward the door. Sir, do you ever think the clocks talk to each other when we're not here? You chuckle softly, adjusting a mainspring. Perhaps. Perhaps they complain about apprentices. He laughs, then yawns stifled, retreats up the narrow stairs. The cat, ever present, curls on the windowsill, eyes half closed, tail twitching lazily. You watch her for a moment, thinking that patience is not just a trait for humans and clocks, but for all creatures who endure the night. You return to the long case, giving it one final inspection. The pendulum swings steady now, each tick measured, each swing sure. The city beyond the window feels distant, inconsequential. Here, in the glow of lamplight and the faint haze of fog, time is yours, shaped by your hands, coaxed into rhythm by skill and devotion. Historians still debate whether 18th-century clockmakers saw themselves as keepers of time or merely its interpreters. You would argue for the latter. You don't own time, you only negotiate with it nightly, one tick at a time. Satisfied, you dim the lamps and step back, listening. The chorus of brass, steel, and pendulum fills the room like a secret song. Outside, the fog swirls. Inside, the night stretches in perfect measured arcs. And for a fleeting moment, you imagine the entire universe as one grand clock, every planet and star swinging in disciplined arcs, every heartbeat aligned with the steady rhythm you've spent decades perfecting. You lean back, letting the quiet envelop you, and savor the rare and exquisite stillness that only a night in perfect company with obedient clocks can bring. The workshop feels heavier tonight, though it's only your imagination, a sense of gravity that comes with familiarity and routine. The evening air is sharp with frost creeping through the window panes, and the streets outside glisten under the pale lamplight. You trudge through the doorway, boots squeaking against the damp wood, and immediately notice the scent of oil mingled with the faint tang of metal that's been warming all day. It's the smell of diligence, of hours coaxing time into order. You start with the turret clock parts scattered across the back bench, remnants from a commission that has challenged your patience for weeks. The iron wheels are cold and stubborn, resistant to persuasion. You tap a file against the edge of a gear, checking the pitch, then adjust a pivot with the gentlest touch. It obeys, finally, the satisfaction vibrating through your fingers like the first note of a long-forgotten song. Historians still argue whether the earliest turret clocks were considered civic pride or just expensive labor. You think it's both. Each clock you've worked on seems to carry a little of the city's soul within it, and sometimes, late at night, you swear you can hear that pulse echoing through the walls. Thomas appears at the doorway, a lantern in his hands, cheeks pink from the cold. "Sir, the cat's asleep on the regulator," he murmurs. "Good," you say. "She's a better apprentice than most." He smiles faintly, stepping inside. It's strange. All these clocks ticking together. It feels alive. You nod. It is alive, in a way. Each one has its rhythm. Each one responds to touch, to care, to attention. Ignore it, and it falters. Nurture it, and it sings. Some clockmakers used to place tiny symbols or initials inside the mechanisms, secret signatures that only they could identify. It was a quiet rebellion against the anonymity of labor, a whispered claim to creation. You smile as you inspect the turret wheels. You've done the same, a tiny gear etched with your mark, hidden from prying eyes. The long case clock, nearly finished now, stands tall near the hearth. You test its swing once more, adjusting the crutch just a fraction, marveling at how such small motions dictate the beat of the entire mechanism. The city outside seems distant, blurred by frost and shadow. Inside, there is order, patience, and certainty. Thomas leans over, tracing a brass cock with his finger. "Do you ever feel tired of it?" "Not tired," you reply slowly, "just aware. Every clock is a conversation. Some nights, I speak more than others. You glance at the skeleton clock nearby, its exposed gears glimmering in lamplight. The tiny wheel shudders slightly. You whisper encouragement, half-jokingly, "Behave, or you'll meet the oil again." Historians still debate whether 18th century makers saw their craft as labor, art, or philosophy. You suspect it was all three. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the rhythm between the ticks and tocks, in the silent understanding that a careful hand preserves time itself. The fire crackles softly, casting shadows across the tall walls. You take a deep breath, letting warmth seep into your bones. Thomas yawns, retreating toward the stairs, and you remain alone with the chorus of clocks. Each swing of a pendulum, each click of a wheel, feels like a heartbeat in a universe reduced to brass and wood. You pause, resting your hands on the long case. Tomorrow, it will leave for Lord Reading. You imagine it standing proudly in a grand hallway, marking the hours with dignity. For now, it is yours, part of your world, a testament to patience, attention, and the quiet magic of evenings spent coaxing life from cold metal. Finally, you dim the lamps, leaving only the regulator's glow. The room folds into darkness, but the clocks continue to speak in their gentle chorus. Outside, frost glimmers. Inside, you listen, letting the slow, measured rhythm of your work and the night soothe your mind. Tonight, the workshop feels especially still, as if the clocks themselves are holding their breath in anticipation. The frost has deepened outside, frosting the window panes with delicate, lace-like patterns, and the moonlight spills silver across the worn planks. You trudge through the door, shaking off your boots, and immediately sense the familiar smells: polished brass, faint smoke from the hearth, and the subtle tang of oil. This scent always signals that you are home, not merely in a building, but in a place where time is yours to steward. You begin with the regulator clock, placing it carefully on the bench. Its pendulum swings with unerring rhythm, the heartbeat of the shop. You listen to its clicks, each precise, each deliberate, and for a moment you imagine it as the pulse of the universe itself. The other clocks seem to join in, forming a quiet chorus of brass and steel. You can almost feel their combined vibrations thrumming through the floorboards. Historians still argue whether 18th century clockmakers viewed their creations as practical instruments or as embodiments of personal philosophy. You suspect it was both, necessary to measure hours, but also a canvas for patience, care, and subtle artistry. Tonight, it feels philosophical indeed. Thomas hovers nearby, lantern in hand, eyes reflecting awe. "Sir, do they ever fail?" "Sometimes," you reply, "but failure is part of their education." And ours. You check the long case one last time, its pendulum now swinging perfectly, and marvel at how the smallest adjustments, a tiny nudge to the crutch, a whisper to the verge, can bring the entire mechanism into harmony. It's almost magical, though you know it is simply the reward of attention and skill. Some clockmakers believed that a cat sleeping near a mechanism improved its accuracy. The cat, predictably, is curled near the fire, tail twitching gently. Perhaps she is the guardian of good timing after all. Outside, the frost glimmers, the world softened by moonlight. The shop is warm, filled with a symphony of ticking that, tonight, feels particularly alive. Each swing, each click, each tiny vibration speaks to you, a dialogue of patience, persistence, and care. You lean back, taking in the long night's work. The letters have been answered, the movements adjusted, the pendulums coaxed into perfection. The apprentice has learned something beyond technique tonight, that time is a living thing, and tending to it requires attention, tenderness, and even a touch of ritual. Historians still argue whether craftsmen like you consciously cultivated these rituals or merely followed habit. But you know the truth. Habit becomes ritual when repeated with care and intention, and ritual is what makes life feel steady in a chaotic world. You extinguish the lamps one by one, leaving only the soft glow of the regulator. The room darkens, but the chorus of clocks continues, a gentle reminder that time does not stop for fatigue, frost, or mischief. You linger, listening to the slow, measured cadence, and allow the peace of the evening to wash over you. You close your eyes, imagining the city outside asleep beneath the frost, the moon casting silver paths across the roofs. The clocks tick on, faithful companions in the night, and you realize that the truest comfort lies in this rhythm, predictable, precise, yet alive. Tomorrow will bring new commissions, new letters, new challenges, but tonight, everything is as it should be. You rise, stretch, and step back from the workbench, letting the quiet of the shop settle like a soft blanket. The apprentice has retreated upstairs, the cat sleeps, and the long case stands proudly, ready for its journey to Lord Reading. You take one last glance around, inhale the scents of brass, wood, and oil, and let the gentle chorus of clocks ease you toward rest. Time, you realize, is not a task, it is a companion, and tonight it has been generous. As the night deepens, the world outside softens into quiet shadow. The streets glisten faintly beneath the moon, and the frost clings delicately to the edges of the window panes, glimmering like distant stars caught in crystal. You breathe in slowly, letting the warmth of the workshop seep into your bones, mingling with the faint scents of oil, polished brass, and lingering candle smoke. The clocks around you continue their gentle chorus, pendulums swinging with measured patience, their ticks and tocks forming a lullaby that wraps the room in comfort. You sink into the rhythm, allowing your thoughts to drift. The day's tasks, the letters answered, the gears oiled, the mechanisms coaxed back into life, fade into a calm satisfaction. Outside, the city sleeps, softened by the hush of frost and night. Inside, you are surrounded by time itself, both obedient and alive, a reminder that each moment you've spent tending these clocks is a moment invested in something enduring. Your apprentice sleeps upstairs, the cat curls silently near the fire, and the long case clock stands proudly, a testament to patience and care. You let your gaze linger on the steady swing of its pendulum, imagining each tick carrying whispers of the lives it will measure, the stories it will witness. Each clock, each mechanism, is more than brass and wood. They are companions, echoing the quiet heartbeat of human devotion, the careful shaping of hours and minutes into harmony. The room grows darker as you let the lamps fade, leaving only the soft glow of the regulator. You exhale, feeling the tension of the day dissolve. The clocks continue to tick steadily, and you know that, for now, everything is as it should be. Let the rhythm of the evening carry you gently toward sleep, wrapped in warmth, in routine, and in the quiet reassurance that time, like you, will endure.